Okay, we will go ahead and get started. And I'll thank you all, first of all, for joining me today. Beautiful morning here in Northern Virginia, just outside of Washington, D.C. And I'm happy that you're able to join us. Hope your day is going well. Our topic today is building a better survey, which, as you might imagine, there's a lot of advice around, especially here at SoGoSurvey. So I pulled out a few specific items for us to focus on today. My name is Melissa. I'm a success enthusiast here. It means that I work on a lot of training. I work on our website and a lot of various projects, including user guide and video. And so that means that I'm really especially interested in your questions throughout our conversation today, as well as providing you some best practices on sort of the high-level view and some technical tips as needed. So please do feel free to ask me questions throughout the course of our conversation using the chat icon at the top of the screen, and I'll pause for questions at the end as well. Just a quick note, I'll also be sending you a recording of our call today, so don't feel like you need to take notes unless you want to. So a few topics for today I've chosen, and we just have about half an hour or so today, so I hope that'll suit your schedule. Even if we don't take the whole time, not a problem, but we've got a few key pieces to start with. So I've identified 5 different topics for today. The first topic is reporting, which seems a little bit unusual, but of course we start with the end in mind. It's always good advice. We'll also take a look at purpose. Why are you doing this in the first place? Probably there's a reason, so keeping that in mind, of course, is important. We'll also look at audience. After purpose, they're one of the most important pieces that you need to consider in building your survey. Engagement as well. Once you have an audience, you certainly want them to be engaged from the beginning all the way through the very end to make sure that you're getting the best possible data. And finally, appearance. It seems almost a little bit superficial, but appearance really does make a difference. And so we want to make sure that that's part of the conversation. You can see that a lot of these topics seem to focus on the design portion of the survey build, and distribution process seems to be neglected, but you can tell that all of these things, all of these ideas really start very early. So even though we're thinking about reporting, a lot of this is really going to focus on the design process, because we know that the better your survey design is, the better quality data you're going to have in the end, and the more effective the entire process is going to be for you and your participants. So let's start with the end in mind here. A little bit of a gif to get you started here today. But starting with the end in mind doesn't have to be a negative sort of idea, of course. Yes, the end is near, but that means for us that the reporting really needs to be a priority while you're doing your planning. So thinking about very first of all, who wants this data? Maybe it's you, and maybe you're the one who's been, tasked by somebody else with collecting this data as well. So really keeping in mind that you need to understand who is going to be using this data, what the various audiences for the data will be from the very beginning is critical. If it's just you, you're still important too. You want to know how that data is going to look when it's delivered, but you really want to prioritize the needs of each of those audiences. So if it's you, if it's a different department within your organization, maybe it's a board of governors of some kind who really need just some high-level data, but you really need to be able to prioritize what must be known, because those are the absolutely critical pieces to start with in your survey. If it's you, that you certainly have a better understanding probably of the needs that you have, but very often this means having those conversations with your target audience, and in this case, the audience of the reports. So asking them, what do you need to know? And also, how do they need to see those results? So how the data will be used, very often it's important to know something like, what is the location of people who are involved, people who are giving their answer. So demographic information. It could be age, it could be gender, it could be, something about their income or education level. All those are really important pieces to know before you get started, because that's going to determine whether your project is a success in the eyes of your audience. And so how do the results need to be displayed? One thing that we notice, and I'm going to just pop out here to show you an example within the platform and a sample survey. One of the things that we notice very often is that companies want to be able to divide their data based on actionable next steps. So perhaps it's department, perhaps it's work location, and sometimes if this is not included within the survey, it can be a little bit difficult to pick through all of your results and divide, who came from which location. That's a very manual process, so it's much, much easier to know that in advance, that your audience wants to see their results divided by work location, for example. You might also want to know, let's see responses from people who are managers and people who are not managers too. So just a few examples here, but you know what the division is. It's going to be most logical for you and your organization. In school districts, it might be school by school. It could be teacher by teacher, for example. And so knowing how that data should be displayed, not necessarily is it a chart or graph or who likes donut charts and who likes pie charts, but really what are the key questions that are going to be used to determine the actionable next steps for your report. So the end is near. So knowing about how those results will be displayed and how that data will really be used. Again, the actionable nature, it's not very helpful if you just end up with a report that you can't take any next steps on, but being able to say, we want to make a certain decision. We want to be able to have all of the information to decide, for example, where should we hold our next retreat? You need to be able to come away with a clear answer so that people can make the decision that's required. So starting with reports, even though it's the very last thing, should be one of the first things that you consider when you're planning your survey. Next up, very closely related, is the purpose of this survey. And if you do not have a clear answer to why this survey is happening, it's very likely that your participants will not understand if there's a purpose or not. So clearly identify the purpose both for yourself and for your participants, especially if there are multiple people working on this project within your organization. They might have different perspectives. You and someone from a different department might have different ideas on why this survey is important, and that can be a challenge because you might end up with questions that may appear to be irrelevant. And so not only the questions that appear, but also the order in which they're delivered. There should be a logical flow. My background is as an English educator, so the writing process is very, very important to me, and I think about this a lot in survey design as well. So knowing that there has to be some sort of point, there has to be some sort of message, and everything that's included should be supportive of that same point. So yes, there are a lot of other things that you might like to know from that audience, but those can be distracting, and they can also add to the length of your survey. So knowing that there's a clear purpose in mind, first of all, from your perspective, but also from the participant perspective, just having a title may or may not be sufficient to explain to your audience what the point of this survey is. So you might want to consider going into your survey and adding a comment that will get you started in explaining to them what your point is. So once you go into your survey, I'm going to open up this example that we're looking at right now. You will see that you have the ability to add, as a question type, it's a little strange of a question type, but add a comment here at the top of your survey. And so this could be something as simple as saying, thanks for your participation, but also letting them know how this feedback is going to be used, what the point is, etc. So for example, letting them know that this information will be used in developing the next professional development sessions gives them an interest in saying, okay, well, I want to be involved in that process. I want to be able to give feedback to improve the quality of professional development that we're receiving, as well as the relevance to me. So you could certainly go on a little bit more. It's a good start of certainly being grateful and thankful and letting people know that you really do value their opinion. It might seem like, again, a little bit superficial, but it really does make a difference for people to have a sort of personalized welcome. If you haven't included a title, if you haven't included your logo, people can get a little bit lost sometimes knowing why this came to them in the first place and if it's even relevant to them. It might turn out that you're only looking to hear from managers, for example, and in that case their data would not be required. So the survey itself is a really great place to start with this. The introductory comments, it can even take up a whole page. Very often we'll have, for example, a letter from the CEO or a letter from the head of a department, something that's a short note encouraging participation. And again, if that's a full page, that's totally fine. It doesn't have to be squished up here, sometimes that's a really nice way to start by a personalized welcome from somebody who is going to sort of encourage that response by motivating people to participate. Another great place to include this kind of information is in the invitation. If you're choosing to send out your survey through an email invitation, one of the best ways to encourage that response is by making sure that your invitation you're looking at, we'll look at it here, includes that data as well. Because remember that the invitation is the first thing that people see if you sent them, if that's how you want them to participate in the survey. So having a really good subject line that does include that purpose, something a little bit entertaining or interesting. I like the oxymoron of retreat forward, but asking people, share your feedback. We want to hear from you. A compelling subject line can really make a big difference. And then within the body of that email invitation, come right out and tell us what that purpose is. You might also want to tell them, for example, how long it might take to participate in this survey, just a few minutes, or how long it will be available, so until a specific date. So setting those expectations from the very beginning help to support that purpose. And also, of course, let them know how the data will be used. You've already thought about the report. You've already thought about the decisions that you need to make. So we value your response. All feedback will be used to plan our retreat priorities and schedule, for example. So keeping in mind that if people don't open your invitation in the first place, you're unlikely to get them to the survey and you're unlikely to collect their response. So making sure that the purpose is as clear as possible from the beginning and that it's a purpose that matters to your audience. Which brings us, of course, to the audience. And you can see it's intentionally chosen as a static image. Everything else we've seen so far today are animated GIFs, but the audience, they're just sitting out there waiting for you to come up with something that's going to engage them, which can be an exciting challenge, of course. So first of all, knowing who your participants are. They are not just people who are sitting there waiting to respond to you. They have busy lives. They have a lot of other things going on. And sort of working to prioritize your survey among them is going to be a big task for you in some cases. Of course, if they are sort of a captive audience, they're your own employees or your own students or maybe even your own family, they may feel obligated or they may be even required to participate. But understanding who they are is really going to make a big difference in terms of the way you build your survey. First of all, what do they already know about this topic? It's certainly unfair to ask people for opinions about things they don't really know about. In some cases, this might mean giving them more information along the way while you're delivering that survey and asking questions. Uninformed feedback is not valuable. If I ask you, what do you think about my outfit today? You have no idea what I'm wearing, and you have no idea how to provide valuable feedback on those kinds of topics. So giving people a little bit more information in advance during the survey, and even taking into consideration their understanding of certain terminology or certain acronyms. You could be making assumptions that you don't even realize. And we'll come back to this again, but testing is an extremely important part. And if you can test your survey with a member of that identified audience, it can help you to be aware of any assumptions that you might be making. What you already know about your audience is really important as well, not just what they know, but what you already know about them. If they've already participated in a past retreat or professional development, for example, you might include that kind of information in the survey itself in order to engage them a little bit more fully. If you already know certain information, you can actually pre-fill some of those answers if you need to include them in the report. We'll come back to that shortly. But the idea of the audience as well is being able to connect with them both on the purpose level, which we've already talked about a little bit, but as well on the distribution level. So how and when can you best connect with this audience? If you know this is employees at your organization, you might connect with them certainly during business hours. That would be the best time for invitations and reminders to go out. But further, you might be considering, is an email invitation the best thing to do? You do have a number of options for distribution, which we'll just revisit here briefly. So when you are looking at publishing your survey, really consider what are those options. You might just want a quick URL that you can share out in a newsletter, email, something like that. But you do have a variety of options there for publishing your survey. So keep in mind, if you have email addresses, a single-use link is a really, really great tool to be able to use. So a nice looking email invitation goes directly to the inbox. You can customize it as you like. Of course, appearance again, but there are a lot of benefits from that single-use link. You can send reminders to those who haven't yet responded. You can track their responses as needed to see if there's any issues in either delivery or a certain team not responding, for example. And you can also do multi-use links in those invitations. So if you want people to forward them, you're not worried about ballot box stuffing or something like that. So publishing by email is a really good one, but of course it only works if you have email addresses for one or more members of that team. Social media is a really big one. Of course, we know, again, this is not appropriate for every audience. Maybe you're trying to do an internal survey. Doesn't make sense to put it on Facebook, but if there's something, you're trying to connect with a professional audience, it makes perfect sense to put it on something like LinkedIn or any number of other social sharing options. So hopefully you'll find something that'll fit your needs, all the way from, Yammer to Google Classroom, even Reddit. There are a lot of different options on here now for social media sharing because we know that's the best way to connect your audience. You want to be able to do that efficiently. One of the fallback ways to publish a survey, certainly, is to put it directly on your website, either a link or embedded within the same structure of your website so it looks nice and seamless, or even an embedded invitation so people don't have to participate right away. Keep in mind, if you are putting something on your website, it's probably accessible to lots of different people. So again, it may or may not be appropriate for internal only surveys, but it can be a really great tool to be able to connect with people all over the world as needed. Remember that publishing on a website is a fairly static option. So if you are putting it up there live, you need to remember that you need to direct people to that link or to that embedded survey. So what other communication are you doing to drive people toward that published link on your website or published survey? So the communication aspect, while it might be included more directly in these first two, does need to be considered while putting something on your website. But that being said, publishing on your website is a really great way to be able to include that on an ongoing basis as well. So publishing on the website, it's always there. It's a really good tool for if you're using a form, for example, something in the HR area that employees should be able to access all the time. Publishing on the website is a really good one if that's your audience as an ongoing purpose over time. And last one here, publishing sort of offline or mobile. Sending SMS invitations is a really great one, but also survey passwords. So if you want to be able to publish that survey on your website, but you do want to limit it, so for example, to all of your employees, anything like that, you can publish that survey to a nice looking landing page that you can customize as well, but only limit access to people who have, for example, an employee ID or student ID, something like that, some unique identifier that you can set as their password. You can do a lot of nice things with that one too, but the main focus is it's publicly accessible but limited to private access. So again, a lot of different options for connecting with the audience, making sure that you know the best distribution method to connect with them, as well as thinking about the timing of that distribution method. Again, if they're employees at your organization, you probably know the best times to connect with them. We usually don't think that first thing Monday morning is the best time to connect with people, nor is it last thing on Friday or Saturday, whatever the end of your work week is. Keeping in mind people's patterns, and you'll start to figure that out a little bit over time when you take a look at your highest levels of response rates. So that tracking after the distribution can be really valuable as well. Next up is engagement. Of course, we want that audience to turn from these static people into these dynamic, excited, happy, engaged participants. And how do we do it? One of the first things to think about once you've got all your questions figured out is making sure that you have all possible answer options. There's nothing that's such a turnoff in your survey to, as a participant, to start seeing questions that are irrelevant or even answer options that don't appear. If you want to do a survey of a group of people and you find that somebody you've sent that to it's not actually applicable to them, that's going to be a big turnoff. So if you say, what's your primary work location, and my primary work location isn't on the survey, right away it's going to start to disengage me. So you really want to make sure that you're doing that testing to ensure that everyone has an appropriate answer. And it's totally fine to do other, please specify, or none of the above, for example. But if you are requiring somebody to answer a question and they simply cannot give you an answer based on the answer options you've provided, they're very likely to drop out. Another thing, of course, is to keep it short. Everyone has a limited amount of time available, and so the idea that we can get our information as quickly and efficiently as possible from our participants, they'll be grateful for it. And of course, you'll probably have an easier time in analyzing your data as well too. But of course, that goes back to figuring out what you must know, the critical data, and avoiding that extra nice to know stuff because it takes up a lot of time and space too. Another piece you can do is pre-filling known information. We call this pre-population. Going back to the example of somebody who's an employee in my organization, I already know a lot of information about them. So it might be very unusual to ask them for that data. So it's like saying, Melissa, what's your name? Like, it doesn't make any sense to be able to, to put people through that effort of giving information that you should already know. And it's a little bit insulting, honestly. Another thing that you can do here is to consider the fact that logic is going to be a really good way to help you stick on those, keep with those relevant questions. So you shouldn't be asking me questions that are irrelevant to me. You should be asking me sort of pre-questions that I can use to help identify whether you need to ask those follow-up questions or additional series of questions. So take a look at that very briefly back in my sample survey here. Starting with pre-population. So the pre-population idea, like I said, very useful if you are doing an employee survey or a survey about people that you already have some information about. And it goes back to knowing your audience. So let's say for my employee survey here, I'm collecting feedback on professional development. I do need a few pieces of almost demographic type information to be used for my report. I can say that my CEO wants to see this information divided by work location or by managers or not managers. Of course, I probably already know the work locations of people in my organization. I probably already know, for example, their hire date and whether they're a manager. So I can actually pre-fill that information. So to pre-fill that information, you see I've already done it here on this one, but I'll tell you what that looks like over here. Under More on the far right, you're going to be able to access, it's called Data Population. And under Data Population, you will see a couple different options come available. And you can, of course, do this in edit mode as well, but just to hover and show you that efficiently. We do have post-population, but just focusing on pre-population to start with. You have three different options. Assuming that I know this hire date, I can pre-fill it for my participants, and I can hide it completely because I already know the information is accurate. I can show it to them and let them edit it, for example, if it's not accurate. Or I can show it to them but not let them change it at all. So think about, if your data is accurate, is it really important to ask people their hire date? Is it important to give them the access to edit it, or do you just want them to know with full transparency that you are collecting that data? So keeping in mind, if you know the data, go ahead and pre-fill it, and then make sure if it's accurate, you can just hide it, and it'll be a lot more efficient, and it'll protect the quality of your data. Again, of course, if it's hidden, it'll be shorter, which goes to another benefit that leads to better engagement as well, too. So you'll see when I look at this example, on hire date, you'll see this question doesn't even appear on my survey. And so the idea that nobody has to know that I'm collecting it, but it can be used in my reporting is very valuable. The other piece that I mentioned was about logic. And so the idea of that logic, fill in this one here, it's a required question. The idea of that logic says, I only want to ask managers certain questions. So I really need to ask the question, are you a manager? So if I say yes, I'm going to add a follow-up question. That's one type of logic, and we call it question display logic. And in that case, I might need to know, are you an associate manager or senior manager? So I can answer that question. If I say no, it's not a relevant question. But if I say yes, I answer this follow-up question, and I'll be led to, through branching, a question series that's specifically about managers. So if I said that I was not a manager, I would not see this specific question series. I would skip directly on to the last stage. So branching is a page-to-page option that gives you the next question series that's relevant. And question display logic gives you that sort of side follow-up question. So what kind of manager are you, for example? So you'll see this icon demonstrates to you that we've got that question display logic. It can be applied here under, scroll down a little bit here for you. Under More, you'll also see that question display logic option right here. And branching, you will see, can also be applied. Branching is the page-to-page function that shows you sort of a choose-your-own-adventure style. And that is clearly applied on this question as well, too. So I have a lot of great videos giving you a little bit more detail on the logic options as well, but hopefully that's a good overview to get you started. So only asking those relevant questions, keeping it short, pre-filling information that you already know, all those go a long way toward building engagement. The last thing here for today is a little bit of a joke, but again, I said it sounds a little bit superficial sometimes to say, but appearance really does make a big difference. As soon as you open a message in your inbox, for example, or as soon as you see something on a website, you start to make these subconscious judgments. Is this something I recognize? Is this a brand that I recognize? Is it a color scheme that I recognize? Does it look good? You know, professionalism, sort of style, really do make a difference. It's an online survey for a reason. It's a lot more efficient, and it looks better. You have a lot of control over the visual settings. And so do take advantage of those to make sure that you're building your brand and ensuring recognition among your audience. The matching of your invitations and surveys, you have these opportunities to improve appearance in both settings. So if your survey and your invitation don't match, people automatically have a feeling that something is not quite right. So you almost don't want people to notice that. You want it to be a seamless experience for them, having the same logos, having the same style guide that you're using for your website or for other marketing materials and communications can make a huge difference. We do have sometimes the issue that people get a little bit carried away with appearance. We've introduced a lot of really nice looking customization options, including changes in background and transparency and lots of templates for web and mobile. But stay calm, I think, is probably the best advice. And try not to get carried away, and do test the survey that you want to send out as well as the invitations. So just a quick shout out to the visual settings portion of design here, which is where you're able to make all of these changes. As you're making changes to both web and mobile options, you can see that you're going to be able to preview this on the right-hand side. So as soon as you make any changes here, for example, in a different template, you're able to see those changes previewed automatically on the right-hand side. So choose a color scheme that you like based on the templates that already exist, and you can go from there, changing the width, the text for each of the different fonts that you want, each of the different types of options that appear in the survey, colors all the way down to background of the entire survey itself. So you can have a lot of exciting changes happening through the course of your survey, but again, not to be distracting. There are some really nice looking backgrounds here that you could be including, but if it's going to distract, it's going to take away from the experience of your participants, don't get too carried away. Make sure that you have your logo on there. Make sure that whatever other style you're using matches your consistent style guide, both for web and for mobile. You can introduce those options. So once you've got that set, you've saved it, you've previewed it, do make sure that when you are ready, when you feel like you're off to the right start, that you are able to test your survey. So sending a test URL or a test invitation. If you're sending just your survey, you're putting it on a website, you can just pull a test URL here. But if you are sending this via email invitation, you do want a test invitation so people can have the full experience. So generating that test invitation, I'm going to walk you through that entire process, and it's going to be able to allow you to share with your colleagues, with your team, maybe even that ideal reporting audience, to make sure that they're happy with the way that your survey looks before you send it out. Because if they're not happy, it can certainly be a challenge for your participants and for you as well. So with that in mind, we've got about a few minutes left here, so I'd love to take any questions that you might have. You can send them to me through the chat feature at the top of the screen, or you can certainly wait for this recording and follow up with me later personally. Either way is fine with me. as I'm waiting for any questions that might appear, I would like to remind you that certainly we have a lot of other webinars for you to join, but we also have in the top right-hand corner of your screen our full help center. So you can always contact support or sign up for webinars. But I'd also love to redirect you to user guides, FAQs, videos that we have as well. There are a lot of good resources that are built right within the platform that are available for you all the time at your convenience. So hearing no questions, that's our time for today. So thank you very much for joining me today. Again, my name is Melissa, and I'll be happy to see you again next time. We look forward to seeing you again, maybe on social media, on our website, within the platform. Happy surveying, and we'll talk to you again soon.